Imagine you've just insulted the most powerful king in Europe in front of his entire court, surrounded by all his nobles. The sentence is clear: death. But there's a problem. You were so clever that you managed to turn your own execution into a joke. This is the true story of Triboulet, the jester who cheated death not once but twice, using only his wit. In the 16th century, in the court of King Francis I of France, lived one of the most fascinating men in history, Triboulet. He wasn't a noble, wasn't a warrior, nor was he a priest. He was a court jester, a character that history has tried to forget, but whose intelligence surpassed that of many royal advisors. Jesters weren't just simple comedians. They were the only ones who could speak uncomfortable truths to the king without losing their heads, literally. But Triboulet took this privilege too far, not once but twice. And on both occasions, when the executioner's blade was ready to fall, his wit saved him from certain death. But before I tell you how he escaped death, let me reveal something that will change your perspective. Triboulet wasn't just any ordinary jester. He had a physical deformity that made him perfect for that role in a cruel era. However, his mind was so brilliant that even Victor Hugo himself immortalized him centuries later in one of his masterpieces. Want to know how a man considered a fool because of his appearance became one of the most cunning survival strategists in history? Stay tuned, because this story is going to surprise you. To understand the greatness of what Triboulet did, you first need to know the context. We're in Renaissance France, an era of cultural splendor but also extreme brutality. King Francis I was known for his love of art, his patronage, and his explosive temperament. In this court full of intrigues, conspiracies, and betrayals, jesters played a unique role. They were entertainment, yes, but they were also pressure valves for political tensions. They could criticize, make harsh jokes, and point out the hypocrisies of the nobility. All of this under the disguise of comedy. Triboulet was the best at this dangerous game. His physical appearance, which included characteristics we would today call traits of dwarfism, made him seem harmless. But behind that appearance was a calculating mind that perfectly understood human psychology and power dynamics. Now then, let's get to the first time Triboulet was about to lose his head. During a royal banquet, the jester made a joke that crossed the line. According to historical accounts, Triboulet spoke too freely about certain nobles and even insinuated things about the king himself that shouldn't be said, not even as a joke. Francis I, furious and feeling humiliated in front of his court, declared that Triboulet would be executed. The sentence was pronounced. The guards were already preparing. The executioner was sharpening his axe. It seemed like the end for the jester. But then something extraordinary happened. Triboulet requested an audience with the king and said, "Your Majesty, as you have been so generous to me over the years, I ask you for one last favor. Allow me to choose the manner in which I will die." The king, intrigued by this unusual request and perhaps feeling some residual affection for his favorite jester, agreed. "Very well, Triboulet. How do you wish to die?" The jester's answer is legendary. "Your Majesty, I choose to die of old age." Think about the genius of this answer. In a single moment, Triboulet accomplished several things simultaneously. First, he made the king and the entire court laugh, reminding them why he was the best jester in France. Second, he turned his own execution into a joke, making it impossible for the king to carry it out without seeming like he didn't understand humor. But the most brilliant part was this. He gave the power back to the king in a way that he couldn't refuse. If Francis I executed Triboulet after that answer, he would look like a humorless tyrant. If he pardoned him, he demonstrated his magnanimity and his appreciation for wit. The jester turned a life-or-death situation into one where the king only had one intelligent option: to pardon him. If you're enjoying this incredible story and want to discover more fascinating tales of historical characters who defied the odds, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I bring stories like this that they didn't teach you in school. Don't miss the second time Triboulet escaped death, because it's even more impressive. Years after the first incident, when it seemed Triboulet had learned his lesson, he got into trouble again. This time it was even more serious. During a theatrical performance at court, the jester did a parody that openly ridiculed several powerful nobles and, according to some versions, even the royal family itself. This time Francis I had no choice. The pressure from the nobles was too much. The king had to act firmly or risk appearing weak. The sentence was clear and final: death by beheading. And this time, to make sure Triboulet couldn't use his tricks again, the king added a condition. "Triboulets," said the monarch, "you will be executed. But for the years of service you've given me, I grant you the choice of the tree from which the wood will be cut to build your gallows." It was a minimal concession, almost an insult. What difference could it make which tree was used? But Triboulet was not an ordinary man. The jester looked the king directly in the eyes and responded with complete seriousness. "Your Majesty, you are too generous. I choose to die hanging from an old age tree." Again, silence filled the room. Then laughter. An old age tree doesn't exist. Triboulet had just said, essentially, that he chose to die of old age again. But this time he did it in a way that seemed to follow the king's instructions exactly. Francis I couldn't help but smile. Once again, his jester had transformed an execution into a masterpiece of wit. And once again, the king had no choice but to pardon him. To execute Triboulet now would be admitting that the jester was smarter than the monarch himself. Triboulet's story didn't end with his natural death decades later. His legend grew so much that centuries later, in 1832, Victor Hugo immortalized him in his work The King Amuses Himself. In this theatrical piece, Hugo presented Triboulet as a complex character, a hunchbacked jester with a daughter he fiercely protected, navigating the dangerous waters of the royal court. Later, Giuseppe Verdi transformed Hugo's work into the opera Rigoletto, where Triboulet became Rigoletto, one of the most iconic characters in world opera. The essence of the intelligent jester who uses humor as a weapon of survival remains intact. But beyond art, Triboulet teaches us something profound about power. He shows us that in the most authoritarian systems, where a person's life depends on the whim of a ruler, wit can be the best armor. Triboulet understood that making the king laugh wasn't just entertainment, it was strategic survival. What can we, in the 21st century, learn from a 16th-century jester? More than you might imagine. Triboulet teaches us about the power of perspective. When facing death, he didn't beg or flee. Instead, he completely reframed the situation, turning it into something where he had control. He also shows us the importance of knowing your audience. Triboulet knew exactly what motivated King Francis I: his ego, his reputation as a cultured man, and his appreciation for wit. The jester used this knowledge to save his life, twice. Finally, Triboulet is a reminder that intelligence has nothing to do with your social position, your physical appearance, or your title. It has to do with how you use your mind to navigate the world. This man, considered a fool because of his role and appearance, outsmarted nobles, advisors, and even the king himself. Triboulet's story is a reminder that, even in the most desperate situations, creativity and wit can change the outcome. This jester had no armies, no riches, no political power. He only had his mind and his ability to make people laugh, and that was enough to cheat death, not once but twice. The next time you face a challenge that seems impossible, remember Triboulet. Ask yourself, how can I change the rules of the game? How can I turn this situation into something where I have control? Sometimes the best strategy isn't to fight power directly, but to make it laugh. If this story made you think differently about intelligence, power, and survival, give me a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that wit can overcome brute force. And tell me in the comments, did you know Triboulet's story? What other fascinating historical characters would you like me to investigate? Remember, in a world that sometimes seems controlled by the powerful, there will always be room for those smart enough to change the rules. Be like Triboulet. See you in the next video.